In today's episode, we dive into the horrifying last moments of wildlife photographers. From a freelance photographer that got chased by a grizzly bear to a research photographer that got mauled by a territorial chimpanzee. But first, let's start with our first story. The morning of October 15, 2016, dawned crisp and clear over Katmai National Park, Alaska. Golden sunlight filtered through the towering spruce trees, casting long shadows across the forest floor, while a gentle breeze carried the scent of salmon and pine needles through the pristine wilderness. The temperature hovered at a perfect 52 degrees Fahrenheit, ideal conditions for wildlife photography during the peak of the annual salmon run. Thompson, 29, the freelance wildlife photographer from Seattle, had been dreaming of this moment for months, saving every penny from his commercial photography gigs to fund this Alaskan adventure. With his weathered hiking boots and well-used camera bag, Marcus embodied the passionate amateur photographer, someone whose technical skills were solid, but whose experience with dangerous wildlife was limited to the occasional black bear sighting in the Cascades. Marcus had that infectious enthusiasm common among photographers who lived for the perfect shot. His friends back in Seattle often joked that he'd risk anything for a frame-filling image, a trait that had served him well when photographing urban wildlife and landscapes, but had never been truly tested in environments where the subjects could fight back. This Alaska trip was meant to be his breakthrough, the collection that would finally land him the magazine assignments he'd been pursuing. He'd studied the work of famous bear photographers, though he'd somehow missed the tragic endings to many of those photographers' stories. At 3:15 p.m., Marcus spotted exactly what he'd been hoping for: a massive male grizzly bear, easily 600 pounds, standing knee-deep in the rushing waters of Brooks Falls. The bear was completely focused on the salmon run, occasionally lunging forward with lightning speed to snatch a fish from the churning water. Other visitors watched from the designated viewing platform 100 yards away, their telephoto lenses capturing distant but safe images of the magnificent predator. But Marcus saw something different. He saw the shot that would make his career. The bear seemed completely absorbed in fishing, occasionally standing on its hind legs to survey the water before dropping back down to continue hunting. Ignoring yesterday's safety briefing, Marcus quietly slipped away from the other tourists. He moved carefully through the forest, using his limited wilderness training to step quietly on moss-covered logs. At 40 yards, Marcus found the perfect position behind a cluster of young spruce trees where there was less supervision. For several minutes, Marcus took many pictures. The bear continued fishing, occasionally glancing in his direction but showing no signs of alarm. Marcus grew bolder, stepping slightly out from behind his tree cover to get an even better angle. But what Marcus failed to notice was how the bear's body language had begun to change, the way its ears had flattened slightly, how its fishing had become more perfunctory, less focused. Then, with a shocking suddenness, as Marcus shifted position for a perfect shot, his boot came down hard on a dry branch. The sharp crack echoed through the forest like a gunshot, instantly shattering the peaceful scene. The massive grizzly's head snapped up, its small, dark eyes locking onto Marcus's position. The bear rose slowly onto its hind legs, standing nearly 9 feet tall as it assessed this unexpected intruder in its domain. Marcus's wilderness training finally kicked in, but it was already too late. Instead of backing away slowly while avoiding eye contact, panic took over. He turned and ran, crashing through the underbrush with all the grace of a freight train. Behind him, a sound that would haunt his final moments: the thunderous crash of 600 pounds of muscle and fury charging through the forest at 35 miles per hour. Brown bears of Alaska are evolutionary marvels, perfectly adapted apex predators whose ancestors have ruled these forests for millennia. Their massive frames hide surprising speed and agility, capable of outrunning any human across any terrain. Their jaws can exert over 1,200 pounds of pressure per square inch, easily capable of crushing bones, while their 4-inch claws can disembowel prey with a single swipe. The chase lasted less than 20 seconds. Marcus made it perhaps 50 yards before the bear's massive paw struck him between the shoulder blades, sending him tumbling face first into the forest floor. The impact drove the air from his lungs and sent his camera flying. The attack was swift and devastating. The bear's massive jaws clamped down on Marcus's neck and shoulder, the 4-inch canine teeth punching through his jacket and deep into vital arteries. Marcus managed one strangled scream before the crushing pressure cut off his ability to make any sound. The bear's powerful bite severed his carotid artery and crushed his windpipe, causing massive blood loss and immediate loss of consciousness. Within 2 minutes, Marcus was dead. The bear, having eliminated what it perceived as a threat to its feeding territory, released its grip and moved away from the body. It showed no interest in feeding on Marcus. This had been a defensive attack, not predatory behavior. The massive predator returned to the stream to resume fishing, leaving Marcus's body motionless on the blood-soaked forest floor. Other visitors at the viewing platform heard Marcus's brief scream echoing through the forest, but by the time park rangers could organize a response team and locate the source of the disturbance, it was far too late. They found Marcus's body 20 minutes after the attack, following the obvious trail of broken vegetation and blood that marked the brief but violent encounter. The incident prompted an immediate review of safety protocols at Katmai National Park. Rangers increased patrols during peak photography season and implemented additional mandatory safety briefings, specifically targeting photographers, emphasizing that no photograph was worth a human life. Warning signs were upgraded with more graphic language about the consequences of approaching bears, and the park began requiring all visitors to watch actual footage of bear encounters before being allowed on the trails. As the Alaskan wilderness reclaimed the site of Marcus Thompson's final photograph, another photographer thousands of miles away was preparing for her own encounter with a predator whose stealth and power had earned it the title of Ghost of the Mountains, a creature whose amber eyes would be the last thing she would ever see. March 22, 2015 brought one of those perfect Colorado mornings that reminded residents why they'd chosen to live in the shadow of the Rockies. Fresh snow from the previous week's storm still clung to the higher peaks, creating a stunning contrast against the dark granite faces and evergreen forests that carpeted the mountainsides. Jennifer Walsh, 34, the professional wildlife photographer from Denver, had been looking forward to this solo expedition for weeks, having secured one of the coveted backcountry photography permits that allowed her access to areas closed to regular hikers. Her specialty was North American predators, and her coffee table book on mountain wildlife was nearly complete. She just needed a few more shots of the region's most elusive resident. Jennifer had a methodical approach to risk assessment, carefully researching animal behavior patterns and seasonal movements before venturing into the field. She'd photographed grizzly bears in Yellowstone, wolves in Minnesota, and even great white sharks off the California coast, always maintaining what she considered safe distances while still capturing the dramatic images that had made her reputation. This particular morning, Jennifer was tracking reports of mountain lion activity in the Glacier Gorge area. For a photographer specializing in North American predators, the opportunity to document one of the continent's most secretive hunters was irresistible, even though mountain lions were notoriously difficult to locate and photograph. At 6:45 a.m., Jennifer discovered exactly what she'd been hoping to find: a fresh elk carcass partially hidden beneath a fallen log about 2 miles from the main trail. The kill was recent, probably within the last 24 hours, and showed the distinctive bite pattern of a large cat. Mountain lions, also known as cougars or pumas, are among North America's most perfectly adapted predators. These solitary hunters can weigh up to 180 pounds and measure 8 feet from nose to tail, with powerful hind legs capable of launching them 40 feet horizontally or 15 feet vertically in a single bound. What makes mountain lions particularly dangerous to humans is their territorial nature and protective instincts around cached kills. Unlike bears, which might bluff charge or give warning signs, mountain lions typically attack without warning when they perceive a threat to their food source. For 2 hours, Jennifer waited with the patience that had made her successful in wildlife photography. At 8:30 a.m., Jennifer's patience was rewarded. Emerging from the dense forest with fluid grace was a magnificent male mountain lion, easily 140 pounds of perfectly coordinated muscle and predatory instinct. She watched as the cat approached its kill. She was so focused on her photography that she failed to notice a crucial detail. The wind had shifted, carrying her scent directly toward the feeding cat. The mountain lion's head snapped up suddenly, its amber eyes scanning the area with laser focus. Jennifer froze, knowing that any movement might trigger the cat's predatory instincts. For a long moment, photographer and predator stared at each other across the 50 feet that separated them. The cat's body language had changed completely. Where moments before it had been relaxed and focused on feeding, now every muscle was tense, ready for action. Jennifer knew she was in serious trouble. She began to back away slowly, avoiding direct eye contact while keeping the cat in her peripheral vision. The mountain lion began to stalk her with the fluid grace that had made its species one of nature's most efficient killers. The cat was clearly torn between defending its cached kill and eliminating what it perceived as a threat to its food source, a conflict that made it even more dangerous and unpredictable. When the mountain lion closed to within 15 feet, Jennifer deployed her bear spray in a wide arc toward the approaching predator. The pepper spray created a visible cloud between them. However, the morning breeze dispersed much of the spray's effectiveness. The partially effective spray seemed to confuse and agitate the cat, rather than deter it completely. A very big mistake that Jennifer made. In a swift second, the mountain lion launched itself through the air in a powerful leap that covered the distance between them in less than a second. Jennifer had just enough time to raise her arms defensively before 140 pounds of muscle, claws, and teeth slammed into her with tremendous force. The impact knocked Jennifer backward onto the rocky ground, her camera equipment scattering as the mountain lion's claws found purchase in her jacket and backpack. The cat's powerful jaws clamped down on her shoulder, its 4 canine teeth punching through fabric and flesh with surgical precision. Jennifer screamed, the sound echoing through the mountain wilderness as she fought desperately against her attacker. The struggle lasted approximately 90 seconds. She fought with the desperate strength that comes from facing death, punching and kicking at the cat while trying to protect her neck and head. Her wilderness training had included basic predator defense, but no amount of preparation could have readied her for the reality of fighting a mountain lion with her bare hands. The cat's claws raked across her arms and torso, shredding her jacket and leaving deep gashes in her flesh. Blood poured from multiple wounds, soaking into the forest floor as Jennifer's strength began to fade rapidly. Jennifer's carotid artery was severed within seconds of the throat bite. The mountain lion maintained its grip for another minute, ensuring its perceived threat was eliminated. Once Jennifer's body went completely limp, the cat released its hold and backed away cautiously. Her body was discovered 4 hours later by a search and rescue team that had been alerted when she failed to check in at her scheduled time. The emergency beacon she carried had never been activated. The attack had been too swift and overwhelming for her to reach it. Her camera equipment was scattered around the attack site, the memory card containing her final photographs of the mountain lion that had killed her. The investigation revealed that Jennifer had made a calculated risk that had turned deadly. Her decision to photograph near a cached kill had put her in an inherently dangerous situation that even her extensive experience couldn't overcome. The mountain lion had been acting according to natural instincts, defending its food source from a perceived competitor. As the Colorado mountains stood silent witness to another tragic encounter between human ambition and wild instinct, thousands of miles away in the warm waters of the Caribbean, another photographer was preparing to document marine life in an environment where visibility was limited and predators struck without warning from the murky depths below. July 8, 2014, dawned with the kind of perfect Caribbean weather that made Playa del Carmen, Mexico, a world-renowned diving destination. The turquoise waters of the Caribbean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, their surface barely disturbed by the lightest of swells that lapped peacefully against the shore. Carlos Rivera, 31, the Miami-based dive instructor and part-time underwater photographer, had been commissioned by a major travel magazine to document the unique cenote diving experience that drew thousands of tourists to Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula each year. Carlos embodied the laid-back professionalism of someone who'd spent his adult life underwater. His photography skills had developed alongside his diving expertise, and his images of Caribbean marine life had been featured in several diving publications. Friends described him as methodical and safety-conscious, someone who never took unnecessary risks despite his obvious comfort in challenging underwater environments. The dive site Carlos had chosen was where the Dos Ojos cenote system met the Caribbean Sea, a location known for its dramatic underwater topography and diverse marine life. Recent heavy rains had reduced visibility in the area, but his local guide, Miguel Santos, assured him that the reduced visibility often brought larger marine animals closer to shore as they followed bait fish into the murky water. Miguel had expressed some concerns about the conditions. The recent storms had stirred up sediment and organic matter, reducing visibility to less than 10 feet in some areas. More concerning was the fact that the murky water coincided with the feeding patterns of bull sharks, which were known to hunt in low visibility conditions where their other senses gave them advantages over both prey and potential competitors. Bull Bull sharks are among the ocean's most dangerous predators, perfectly adapted for hunting in the shallow, murky waters where rivers meet the sea. What makes bull sharks particularly dangerous is their hunting strategy in murky water. At 4:30 p.m., Carlos and Miguel entered the water near the cenote mouth, where fresh water from the underground cave system mixed with salt water from the Caribbean. The visibility was indeed poor, extending only about 8 feet in any direction. For the first 20 minutes of the dive, everything went according to plan. Carlos captured beautiful images. Carlos was particularly focused on photographing a school of Sergeant Major damselfish when Miguel suddenly grabbed his arm and pointed into the murky water ahead of them. Through the limited visibility, a large, dark shape moving slowly through the water about 15 feet away. As the shape moved closer, its distinctive profile became unmistakable. They were looking at a bull shark, easily 8 feet long and probably weighing close to 300 pounds. Carlos began photographing immediately, his camera's strobe firing repeatedly as he captured frame after frame of the magnificent shark. The bull shark's behavior changed almost immediately when Carlos's first strobe fired. The bright flash of artificial light in the murky water seemed to confuse and agitate the predator. Bull sharks hunt primarily by detecting vibrations and electrical impulses, and the sudden burst of light combined with the electrical activity from the camera equipment created an unusual stimulus that triggered the shark's investigatory response. Miguel recognized the danger immediately and began signaling frantically for Carlos to stop photographing and slowly ascend. But Carlos was caught up in the excitement of the encounter, continuing to shoot as the shark circled closer. The shark began displaying classic investigatory behavior, approaching the divers in a slow, deliberate manner while using its other senses to determine whether these strange creatures might be potential prey. Carlos felt a sudden bump against his leg as the shark's broad snout made contact, testing whether this unusual object might be edible. The bump was firm, but not aggressive, typical behavior for a bull shark investigating something unfamiliar. However, Carlos's startled reaction to the contact, combined with the continued flashing of his camera strobe, seemed to escalate the shark's interest. Carlos tried to follow Miguel's frantic signals to ascend slowly, but his movements in the water seemed to further stimulate the shark's predatory instincts. The attack came with shocking suddenness. The bull shark approached from Carlos's blind spot, using the murky water to mask its approach. The shark's powerful jaws clamped down on Carlos's lower leg just above the ankle, its serrated teeth designed for gripping and tearing rather than the clean cuts associated with great white attacks. Unlike the head-shaking behavior often attributed to sharks in popular media, the bull shark maintained a steady grip while using its powerful body to thrash from side to side. This behavior is designed to incapacitate prey quickly rather than tear away chunks of flesh. Miguel reacted quick. He swam directly at the shark, banging his tank with his dive knife to create loud metallic sounds while shouting through his regulator. The noise and commotion seemed to confuse the shark, which released its grip on Carlos's leg after approximately 15 seconds of contact. The shark disappeared back into the murky water as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving Carlos floating in a rapidly expanding cloud of his own blood. Miguel immediately grabbed his injured partner and began an emergency ascent, fighting against Carlos's increasing unconsciousness and the weight of his camera equipment. Carlos remained conscious during the ascent, but was clearly going into shock from blood loss. The shark's bite had severed the posterior tibial artery in his lower leg, and despite Miguel's attempts to apply pressure to the wound underwater, Carlos was losing blood at a dangerous rate. They broke the surface to find local fishermen already responding to Miguel's earlier emergency signals. The fishermen pulled Carlos from the water and immediately applied a tourniquet to his leg while racing toward shore at full throttle. The ambulance was waiting at the dock when they arrived, but Carlos had already lost consciousness from blood loss. The severed artery had caused massive hemorrhaging that the improvised first aid couldn't fully control. Carlos died in the emergency room despite the medical team's best efforts. He had lost too much blood during the attack and subsequent transport, and the trauma to his lower leg had caused irreparable damage to major blood vessels. The incident led to immediate changes in diving protocols for the area. New regulations required minimum visibility standards for all commercial dive operations, and guides received additional training in shark encounter procedures. Emergency response protocols were also improved, with faster boats and better medical equipment stationed at popular diving locations. As the Caribbean waters washes away the last traces of the tragedy that had unfolded beneath their surface, another researcher halfway around the world was preparing to document document the behavior of humanity's closest relatives, primates whose intelligence and strength would prove to be a deadly combination when territorial instincts overrode years of careful habituation. September 12, 2013, brought the kind of perfect weather that made fieldwork in Tanzania's Mahale Mountains a privilege rather than a hardship. A gentle breeze rustled through the mahogany and fig trees, carrying the rich scents of tropical vegetation and the distant calls of the chimpanzee troop that Dr. Amanda Foster had been documenting for the past 6 months. Dr. Amanda Foster, 37, the UC Davis primatologist, had dedicated her career to understanding tool use among wild chimpanzees, and her research in the Mahale Mountains was providing groundbreaking insights into the cognitive abilities of humanity's closest living relatives. Her work was funded by a prestigious National Science Foundation grant, and the data she was collecting would form the foundation of her upcoming book on primate intelligence. Amanda embodied the dedicated field researcher, intellectually rigorous, physically tough, and possessed of the infinite patience required to document animal behavior in the wild. She'd spent 6 years working with habituated chimpanzee troops, first in Uganda and now in Tanzania, building a reputation as one of the world's leading experts on wild chimpanzee behavior. The Mahale Mountains Chimpanzee Research Station had been operating for over 40 years, with multiple generations of researchers documenting the complex social dynamics of several habituated troops. Amanda was working with the M Group, a community of 38 chimpanzees that had been studied continuously since the 1970s. The long-term nature of the research meant that individual chimpanzees were known by name, and their genealogies traced back multiple generations. The alpha male of the M Group was a massive chimpanzee named Frodo, a 120-pound powerhouse who had held his position at the top of the troop's hierarchy for over 3 years. Frodo was known to researchers as an unusually aggressive individual, even by the standards of male chimpanzees. Chimpanzees are humanity's closest living relatives, sharing over 98% of our DNA, but they are also incredibly powerful and potentially dangerous animals. What makes chimpanzees particularly unpredictable is their complex social intelligence combined with their capacity for explosive violence. Male chimpanzees regularly engage in dominance displays and territorial conflicts that can result in serious injuries or death. When these behaviors are directed toward humans, even researchers who have worked with the animals for years, the results can be catastrophic. At 1:20 p.m., Amanda was positioned about 10 meters from the main group, documenting the termite fishing behaviors of several adult females, when Frodo began one of his characteristic dominance displays. Amanda had witnessed dozens of Frodo's displays over the past months. The alpha male would typically begin with vocalizations, then progress to increasingly dramatic physical demonstrations designed to reinforce his position at the top of the troop's social hierarchy. Frodo's display escalated rapidly beyond anything Amanda had previously observed. Amanda should have retreated immediately according to established protocols, but she was mesmerized. This was exactly the kind of rare dominance display that could provide crucial data for her research, and she continued photographing and taking notes even as Frodo's aggression escalated beyond normal parameters. The turning point came when Frodo spotted Amanda during one of his charging runs through the forest. In his heightened state of aggression, the alpha male apparently perceived the human researcher as either a challenger to his dominance or a threat to his troop. Frodo redirected his display directly toward Amanda, charging through the underbrush with the terrifying speed and power that had made him the undisputed leader of his community. Amanda finally recognized the danger and began to back away, but her movement seemed to further trigger the enraged chimpanzee's aggressive response. The impact when Frodo reached Amanda was devastating. 120 pounds of muscle and fury slammed into her with tremendous force, knocking her to the forest floor and sending her camera equipment flying into the underbrush. Amanda tried to protect herself by curling into a defensive position, but Frodo's attack was relentless and systematic. Frodo's first target was Amanda's hands as she tried to protect herself, his massive canine teeth punching through flesh and bone with crushing force. The pain was immediate and overwhelming, but Amanda's screams seemed only to further enrage the attacking chimpanzee. Frodo's jaws clamped down on Amanda's right hand with devastating force, his canine teeth easily crushing the small bones of her fingers and palm. He then grabbed her left arm with his powerful hands, his grip strong enough to fracture her radius and ulna as he shook her violently. Blood poured from multiple bite wounds as Amanda fought desperately to protect her vital areas. Due to Frodo's extreme agitation, the attack continued for approximately 45 seconds before Amanda's Tanzanian research assistant, Joseph Malimu, heard her screams and came running through the forest. He began shouting at the top of his lungs while throwing rocks and sticks at Frodo, creating enough noise and distraction to break the chimpanzee's focus on Amanda. Frodo's attention shifted to this new threat, and he briefly considered attacking Joseph as well. But the research assistant continued his aggressive display, making himself appear as large and threatening as possible while maintaining enough distance to avoid being caught. After a tense standoff that lasted several seconds, Frodo's aggressive state began to subside, and he gradually moved away from the scene, still producing occasional threat displays, but no longer focused on attacking the humans. Joseph immediately began first aid on Amanda's massive wounds, using his field medical training. Amanda's injuries were severe, but not immediately fatal. The nearest medical facility was 6 hours away by boat across Lake Tanganyika and then by vehicle to the regional hospital. A helicopter evacuation was impossible due to the remote location and dense forest canopy. Joseph and the other research staff did everything they could to stabilize Amanda during the long journey, applying tourniquets to control bleeding and administering IV fluids to combat shock. Amanda remained conscious for the first 2 hours of transport, even helping to direct her own medical care based on her knowledge of field medicine. However, the cumulative effects of blood loss, shock, and infection from the contaminated bite wounds gradually overwhelmed her system. Amanda died approximately 4 hours into the transport, having lost too much blood from the multiple bite wounds despite the medical team's best efforts. The investigation that followed revealed that Amanda had made a critical error in judgment by continuing to document Frodo's display instead of retreating when his aggression escalated beyond normal parameters. Chimpanzee researchers had long known that dominance displays could be unpredictable and dangerous, but Amanda's extensive experience had perhaps made her overconfident in her ability to assess the situation safely. The tragedy led to immediate changes in research protocols at Mahale and other chimpanzee research sites worldwide. New safety guidelines required researchers to retreat immediately when any chimpanzee began displaying aggressive behaviors, regardless of the scientific value of the observations being made. Mandatory two-person research teams were implemented for all field observations, and emergency medical equipment was upgraded at remote research stations. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.